I'm Mitch.
I'm Keith.
And this is Layman's Term Podcast, where a couple of lay people, not clergy, discuss where life and faith intersect. We're glad you joined us. Today we're talking about transcendence, kind of that concept of growing in faith. And specifically, we're talking about growing in our ability to forgiveness. We've talked about in the last couple of weeks, we've talked about vengeance, the desire, the human desire and emotion for vengeance, and how vengeance is God's to enact, not ours. So releasing that vengeance. Last week we talked about obedience and obeying God's command to forgive, forgive others. Obeying that command, being obedient to God in our humanness, our desire to be right, our desire to be justified, worldly, our desire to be to be superior to our enemies.
And we kind of talked about a scale, right? So the first week, a couple weeks ago, we talked about vengeance and moving past that. That's like the bottom of the scale. Where
bottom rung of the
ladder. Bottom rung of the ladder where you want to enact, vengeance on people. You release that, so you kind of move down that scale to obedience, where maybe you don't really want to forgive somebody, but you do. And that's kind of that middle rung of the scale. And so today we're talking about that transcendence portion, that end of the scale.
Which is like the next 500 rungs on that very long ladder in pursuit.
The first two was so easy.
First was like rung 1 and 2, and then there's this vast middle ground, because what we're going to talk about today is that end goal. Last week we kind of hit it on fake it till you make it. We're going to dive in a little bit more on that our belief as lay people, God is totally cool with fake it till you make it, because here's making it, right? If we're living out a life modeled after Jesus, or we're living out a life modeled after Christ, our pursuit of Christ likeness, our pursuit of acting as though Christ were acting through us, here's your imagery. Christ is on the cross, dying. Final words. It's wrapping up. He's been treated horrifically. The ones that put him physically onto the cross, where he is suffocating to death, they're dividing up his clothes with a method of gambling. And his quote is, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Forgive them.
Man, ultimate transcendence right there.
Asking in the moment of the most horrific, excruciating, actually that word comes from crucifixion, little nugget for you. Excruciating is a word that was birthed out of crucifixion.
I knew that.
I know, but our listeners maybe didn't.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Hopefully they're lay people like us, and that's a little.
They're like, whoa, I did not know that.
That is a nugget. Write that down. Tuck that away in the old
noggin.
Anyway, in that excruciating moment of, I don't know that there's ever been a worse situation in human history. That's where Christ is calling us to ask forgiveness for those that have hurt us, wronged us, in all sorts of ways, to be looking out for them in the eyes of the Lord.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that it's not forgive and forget, right? You're not forgiving somebody with the thought process that you're just gonna forget what happened and move past it, right? Like it still affects you. It still potentially can affect your personality, how you handle situations, right? Depending on how bad the trauma was. And so I think that it's easier to forgive somebody that rear ends you.
Yeah.
right? Like in your car, you're like, oh, you just hurt the car.
I got insurance.
Yeah, I got insurance, right? Or some kids egg your house or something, right? Like really, that's kind of the easy forgiveness portion, right? It's really the stuff that, like a close friend or a loved one.
Betrayal. Deep wounds of betrayal.
Yeah. And it's those kinds of trauma that I think are the hardest to forgive, because in some cases you think that by forgiving that person you're
telling them it was okay.
You're telling them it was okay. Yeah. Number one, you're saying like, I forgive you because I understand why you did that, right? Like, no, that's not it. In that forgiveness, you think then that everything's going to be okay between you two, and that may not be either, right? So, but I do want to talk about an interesting thought, which is, and this has happened to me, to people around me. I'm sure it's happened to you in your life, but when you approach somebody with forgiveness and you forgive them in your heart, right? But then you go and you want to kind of maybe mend that relationship, and you tell them, and then what do you do when they don't recognize that what they did hurt you?
Yeah.
Right?
Or they're like, or you get the look on their face that's like, why did you let that bother you?
Yeah.
Whoa. Why are you so sensitive?
Mm-hmm. I mean, and that's happened to me in my life, right? And I'll tell a story from my childhood. I had a best friend. I won't name him, but you know who you are. And it was like kindergarten, or like maybe I was 4 or something, right? And I went over to his house to play, and he came to the door with one of the neighbors who was like my arch enemy.
Oh, no.
Right? Okay. And he looked at me, he says, I'm sorry, I can only have one friend over at a time. Crushed me. Crushed me. Ran home. I was under the kitchen table crying my eyes out. My mom's like, what happened? Can't tell her just because I'm crying. And so I tell her. And of course, my protected mom's like, I'll handle this. Right? I'm like, no. So we both walk over there, and she goes, she gets his mom or whatever and says, hey, did you tell him you only have one friend over at a time? And she's like, no, he can have as many people over as he wants, right? And so the kid's standing there, and my mom tells her what happened, and she looks at this unnamed individual who ought to know who they are if they listen to this podcast. And like, why did you say that? And he's like, I don't know, I just didn't feel like playing with him. Like, no concept that what he would say would hurt my feelings, because obviously I guess I felt like I was a better friend to him than he felt like he was to me, right? And so, like, it crushed me even further.
Well, maybe he felt, and like the thought process, this juvenile thought process.
Yeah.
Maybe he thought you couldn't handle the truth.
Yeah, you can't handle the truth. Yeah, no, so, it's like those moments, right, where you go to like try to work it out, and they're like, nah, I didn't. Why did you take offense to that? I just don't want to play with you.
You realize you're the only one who's been working it out.
Yeah.
And I was reminded, we're kind of prepping for this and talking. There's this. I think it kind of applies here. You can look it up. It's Zeigarnik effect. Don't ask me to spell it. But some psychologists somewhere where names are Zeigarnik.
Like maybe somewhere in Europe.
Yeah. Okay. Or anywhere in the United States. But I think it's older than that. But the psychology of the brain works more on uncompleted tasks.
Oh, okay.
So if we're at odds on something, and maybe you just come out victorious, right? Whatever it is, right? Deciding deciding where staff's going to eat lunch
Oh.
together today, right? And I was like, really wanted La Fuente, not a sponsor, should be. And you wanted Jimmy John's, and we ended up with Jimmy John's, and I hold that, I hold on to that loss, and my brain
works on
what
it
could
more
I have said
then to get my
and if you
point across.
And if you kind of look at that, like, why on earth, if you were like Team Jimmy John's, right? Hey, let's go to Jimmy John's. I'm like, okay, yeah, let's do that. And then we go. You're like, why would you hold on to that beyond lunch? Like, got your way, everything worked, So oftentimes, I think in the forgiveness loop, those that we feel have wronged us have no clue.
Yeah.
That we took a situation as a slight.
Yeah.
Or as
and so
because their brain's been working on it.
And so I guess part of my point is that you don't have to tell the person that you forgive them.
Correct.
Right?
Because unless it's a real mutual,
like, mutually, maybe you hurt them and then they hurt you and then you hurt them and then they hurt you.
Unless there's a mutual reconciliation
Right.
that needs to happen.
Right.
Oftentimes, I think what we're saying is sometimes the most important reconciliation is between you and God and what you're holding against your fellow humanity.
Exactly. And I think with the example of Christ on the cross is that he didn't hey guys, don't worry. You guys don't know what you're doing. I'm going to ask God for forgiveness for you. And they were like, oh shoot. We really messed up. We're sorry, Jesus. Bring him down. Yeah. Right? Like, it wasn't like that. He released his right to retribution. Like, he went through the whole process, but like really quickly, right? Because that's just who he was. He didn't forgive them because he felt like he had to or whatever. That was just who he was as a person, right? And so, maybe these people didn't even hear him, right?
Yeah. And here's a crazy thing to think about. Jesus, in his fully human, fully divine nature, recognized that he in that moment he was leaving the earthly, worldly self behind, but he was recognizing that those he's asking forgiveness for have the rest of their life in maybe Zeigarnik effect, right? Like the loop of this situation that they're living in right now. Like,
yeah, I don't know. Do you think Romans at the time really understood what they were doing? I mean, I would say Pontius Pilate probably did.
Do you think maybe a couple days later, when the tomb was empty, they may have been a little bit of? This is another podcast for another time.
This is definitely a podcast for another time. But I would probably argue that there's some individuals in the story of Jesus that probably realize it. Nicodemus probably realized what was going on. You could probably say Pontius Pilate even did, because he didn't want to. He left it up to the people to decide whether to free Jesus or the thief, right? Or the thief, right? And so, like, he kept giving the people or even the Sanhedrin a choice to not go through with it, right? And then, he ended up doing it to kind of keep the peace. But I definitely probably would say he probably thought about it for a long time afterwards, right? And that kind of loop of, man, I shouldn't have done that. What could I have done differently, right? So yeah, that's an interesting thought.
And hey, if you want to dive into more scripture and research as well, this is a fulfilling a prophecy, them casting lots for his clothes, back from Isaiah, I believe. So start at the beginning of Isaiah, read through it, and see where you come across this, because I can't tell you where to find it.
And it may not even be Isaiah.
It could be pretty good. Hey, as a layman, I think there's a good shot.
90 plus. Hey, but you had an interesting thought too about a lot of times we're talking about forgiving other people, right? But what about forgiving yourself?
I think that's huge.
I think it's harder.
I think one of the craziest things to think about with forgiveness when you put it in terms of apology, and I'm going to circle back to this, forgiving yourself, right? Is there's this juxtaposition between what you mentioned earlier about forgiveness means everything's okay now.
Right. Which is, I mean, not
like
right.
Forgiveness equates to an apology that equates to what I didn't hurt you or whatever, right? And that's where we get super confused. And this happens at early age, right? Like, apologize to your brother, sorry.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that fixed it.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, you punched him in the nose. It still hurts, right? Getting punched in the nose still hurts, whether sorry isn't some miracle turn back time. But the most interesting thing I've read on this, I read on the wall of the Jimmy John's. Second Jimmy John's shout out. But it says
they're not a sponsor.
They're not. They should be.
They should be.
We're gonna pursue that. So it's about apologies and what a proper apology is, and it's like 3 parts. It's like, first, I was wrong, right? I was wrong. I recognize it. I hurt you. I'm sorry, and I won't do it again. So 3 parts. Wrong. Sorry. Won't do it again. And whenever we're apologizing to ourselves, I think sometimes we leave.
Don't do it again.
When we're exactly. When we're forgiving ourselves, right? Like, I think that's
it's like, I'm really going to work out today.
The hardest part is truly forgiving ourselves.
Yeah.
Because what we'll do is we'll do this
dance.
This pathetic child, weak brother apology.
I agree with that.
Sorry.
I completely agree with that.
We'll be a dirtbag. We'll need to forgive ourselves, and we'll say sorry.
Sorry, but we're still a dirtbag.
But we're still a dirtbag, not transcendent.
The
important thing is faking it till you make it, and the hard thing to swallow is making it. Is where Jesus was on that cross, and the forgiveness He extended. So that's where we're called to aspire to be. That's where we're called to journey. That's the million-rung ladder. It's okay to come up short of that, as long as that's where we're going.
And I think that there's an important kind of subtext to this, which is that, you know, we don't want to say, you know, we don't want the quote to be, well, you know, if somebody hurts you, just forgive them because it's what Jesus would have done. You just follow the Bible, right? Because it's so much more complicated than just a simple equation, right? Yeah. You get hurt, forgive them, move on. And I think that too often we sometimes we parent that way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, where a kid hurts another kid, to your point, and we're like, apologize to your brother, now go to your room, and then we think it's over, but it's not, you know. And I think we do that too with our friends and our family, where, you know, our friend is hurt by something and they come and tell you, and you're like, well, you just need to get over that, right? I mean, I've done it.
Oh yeah.
Because to you it doesn't. It's like, I don't even know what, in your brain, you're like, I don't even know why you're hurt like that. Like,
well, yeah, because that's the third party to the Zeigarnik effect,
right, exactly,
of hurtness, right? And when you guys get in and research the Zeigarnik effect, because I know you will, it's also like,
I feel like it starts with a Z.
It does. It starts with a Z.
Z-U?
Yeah.
Z-U-R?
G. I think there's some letters with some interesting additional symbols above them.
Oof.
You know those things?
The little dots?
Maybe some dots, maybe some lines or dashes. Okay. Not sure, but I think some of that's in there. I'm a visual learner, so I've seen it. So anyway, if you go out and research this, this isn't a specific psychology related to forgiveness and interpersonal trauma, right? It's also like you didn't fully unload the dishwasher, right? Like, your brain's...
My dishwasher is never fully unloaded.
It's the reason TV shows leave you hanging before commercials.
Right.
Your brain's
They
going to
want
work.
you to think about it until next week.
So the TV show wants your brain to work about it so that you don't change the channel. The commercials would really prefer that your brain wasn't working on it and focused on the commercial. But they know they got half your attention.
Yeah.
Because you didn't change the channel.
Yeah.
Anyway,
so I think that's a good. I mean, I think that's a good, series of, and to kind of wrap it up a little bit. Where are you on the scale? Of vengeance, obedience, and this kind of idea of transcending through not wanting to forgive, to it becomes more a natural reaction to things after you've metabolized the hurt, right? Or the thing. How do you naturally transcend into forgiveness? So
how do you get to that point where Jesus says where that metabolism was
instantaneous? Oof, probably never.
Probably not, but that's where we're called to aspire to be. That's it for this week. I'm Mitch.
This is Keith.
And you're listening to Layman's Term Podcast. Thanks for joining us.
See you.